Good morning, Metalheads Internet. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. And today we're looking at a whole bunch of fucking records from the month of August 2019. August was a great month for heavy metal music, and I think for the first time this year, we saw great music from all the subgenres and all the different levels of heavy metal. We had great records from the world of thrash metal in the form of Sacred Reich and a surprise thrash LP from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Some great modern death metal and deathcore from the likes of Carnifex and Shadow of Intent. Some solid metalcore as well from artists such as Killswitch Engage and Knocked Loose. And on top of that, two big name bands also both released highly anticipated, long-awaited, and pretty solid records. You had Slipknot with We Are Not Your Kind, which saw the band going into much darker, experimental, and psychedelic territory, lyrically and musically speaking. And you even had Tool, who finally came out with their 5th studio album after a 13-year wait. Bravo. Judging by all that, it's almost safe to say that we didn't really miss a lot in the month of August. It feels like we covered it all. But I was able to find a couple records, a couple EPs that I still think are worthy of recognition, worthy of at least some small debate and discussion. So let's jump right into it, and let's jump right into it with In the Raw from Tarja Turunen. Tarja, an incredibly unique and even somewhat iconic metal singer for this modern era. Her more operatic take on traditional heavy metal singing has inspired waves and waves of bands. It paved the way for Nightwish, whether they want to admit it or not at this point. And it's that same voice that remains the most satisfying and captivating thing about all of her solo records. And the same can be said for In the Raw, her 5th solo album within the hard rock and heavy metal world. Her vocals are incredible. Don't even try to argue this. Get the fuck out of here. She is, on a purely technical level, probably one of the best singers out there right now. Unfortunately, these rock solo albums have not done her any fucking favors whatsoever. The music often relies on tried and true pop rock formulas and often doesn't really do anything to embolden or contrast her incredible performances. Very similar to Delain in some aspects, but I think I finally have to give Delain some credit. They are definitely way better composed and produced on all of their records than Tarja is on her solo rock records. Don't get me wrong, if you've been a fan this whole time, I don't really see why this album would disappoint you. I think that there are certainly some pretty interesting moments on this record, particularly within the final track. I like how the song completely embraces this bombastic symphonic metal. But I want to hear more of that. I'm tired of these pop formulas. I'm tired of such standard and bland songwriting being paired with such a dramatic and powerful voice. By no means terrible, but compared to her classical records or her work with Nightwish, it just really doesn't even hold a candle. Next up is Alien from Northlane, a band I've never particularly followed all that avidly, but I have to admit that there are definitely a lot of interesting things happening on this record. The band on this record is infusing a modern metalcore sound with nu metal influences, prog metal influences, EDM, alt metal influences, creating something very moody and violent and eclectic and strange. There's a much more intellectual and personal touch lyrically brought to the record, as the album has the flow of a rock opera almost, and also deals with some more personal things that the band has been dealing with in their lives. Take, for instance, the track Bloodline, which is about the lead singer and his drug-addicted parents and how he dealt with that. A lot of care and attention was put into this album, and it's evident almost immediately, which is why it's a shame that I don't feel like, despite all of these excellent ideas, I don't feel like the execution is really all there. Or at least not for me. And with that in mind, maybe I have to chalk it up to this album just not being my cup of tea, despite all of the good things going into it. And that's fair to say, because a lot of people have been enjoying this record. I've talked to a lot of people that have found so much to love about this thing and have been listening to it quite avidly. And good on you, honestly. If I'm in the minority, then so fucking be it. I promise you I don't mind that whatsoever. I still acknowledge the thought, the care, and attention put into this thing, even if it's not a record that I would avidly listen to in my spare time. I would say if you're looking for something a little bit more fresh and unique in modern metalcore, definitely check this out. Next up, Renegades from Equilibrium, an album that I did also come pretty close to reviewing, if we're being honest. Didn't quite come to that point, can't even say I remember why, to be honest. But hey, at least we get to talk about it here. And I'm happy that we do because I really enjoy this record. It's clean, it's straightforward, really sharp, but it has these great progressive and folk metal flourishes to give it a little bit of bounce, to give it a little bit of atmosphere, to give it a little bit more melody in certain parts. I do think some of the synths on this record are a bit egregious and could be arranged better, but it's still kind of fun, even if in a really cheesy way. I particularly like this really weird collaboration they have called Path of Destiny, featuring a German hip-hop group called the Butcher Sisters. I'm not really sure how this was conceived or what the thought was going into this, but it is inherently pretty entertaining. And that's the vibe for the whole record. It's just really entertaining, really catchy, really engaging, really fun. Definitely check this out if you're looking for something a little bit more lighthearted in the world of death metal, particularly when this year there's been so much super grim, gross, greasy shit, you know? That's all fine and good, but sometimes you need just a little bit of lighthearted fucking bubblegum flavored fun, and that's exactly what Equilibrium bring to the table here. Next up we have Victorious from Skillet, the Christian radio rock band. Oh boy. Just no. Just no. No! 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 It's so bad! I guess if you work for the military and you ever wanted to fucking torture somebody, put this album on. Good for something, I guess. Next up, Everything That Dies Someday Comes Back, a collaborative record from Uniform and The Body, their second collaboration together, if I'm not mistaken. I tried my best to get into this thing. I personally found it a little too weird and bizarre and musically unorthodox for me to personally enjoy. That being said, if you are a fan of industrial and noise rock and experimental music, there's a lot to enjoy here. There's a lot for you to sink your teeth into. A lot of the arrangements here are really dark and complex and dizzying. To some extent, it reminds me a lot of the harsher elements from Full of Hell, and even to a certain extent, the recent record from Lingua Ignota, Caligula. But the former succeeds by being so neck-snappingly violent and gruesome, and the latter succeeds by having a real powerful emotional core, whereas this is just weird and harsh and a little bit strange and confused. Perhaps I'll have to chalk this up to personal bias at the end of the day, but nonetheless, I'm not going to sit here and lie to y'all. I personally didn't enjoy the record. It's really that simple for me. Next up, I've Seen the Future and It Does Not Work, the debut album from Shock Narcotic, which features members of the Dillinger Escape Plan, the Black Dahlia Murder, Child Bite, and Battle Cross. Anyone expecting some weird hybrid of all of those sounds and influences might be disappointed, because it's not that, although to a certain extent I understand, because that sounds wild. But anyone looking for a good hearty dose of modern death grind and grindcore, gonna find a lot to enjoy here. It's very gritty and dirty. Everything feels like it's caked in mud and soil and iron. And that sound thankfully doesn't hinder some of the really sharp riffs that do come out of this thing. If anything, it makes those riffs feel really prominent and crazed when they show up. And there's just a lot of energy and chemistry flowing throughout this thing. I mean, all of these guys are known for playing in high energy bands, and that high energy combines quite nicely in here. Is it perfect? No, I mean, it's a little generic in some aspects, and it's short even by the standards of grindcore, wrapping up at about 18 minutes. Frankly, I've listened to EPs that are double that length. But it's fun, it's nasty, doesn't waste your fucking time, and I don't really picture anyone being super upset with it as long as that's exactly what you're looking for. Next up is Dominion from HammerFall, the band's 11th studio album. Holy fuck, I hadn't realized they'd been around that long. When I reviewed the last Sabaton record, I said that Sabaton were like the AC/DC of power metal. But now that I think about it, that title probably is more accurately belonging to HammerFall. I mean, these guys have never changed. They have kept up with the high-octane fantasy, heavy metal, power metal, fusion sound. They love big riffs and big solos and huge melodies. They've never had a major dip in quality or a major rise. They have stayed the pace with really steady, consistent records. For me personally, that makes Dominion a little bit boring and inessential because I already know what to expect on nearly every single song. There are no surprises. There's nothing that I feel is really pushing the band to new areas. There's nothing I really feel that's invigorating that I can't get from other younger bands that are playing much better music. Now, that's not to say there isn't fun to be had. I mean, on a very basic level, this is really great party music. Like, if I was at a pub and this was playing, I would raise my glass in the air, maybe even sing along to some of this. And I won't lie, I wouldn't even mind seeing HammerFall live at this point. I bet they put on actually a pretty fun show. But would I pick this up on vinyl? Would I even listen to it maybe 3 or 4 more times? Probably not. I don't really picture that happening. Next up, Blood Year from Russian Circles, an album that, if we're being totally honest, I've spent very little time with. I've listened to it a couple times, but not enough to say that I really understand or even really appreciate this record. But I keep getting requests, and we're already here, so fuck it, let's just do this. This album to me is the definition of background music. It is music to be played in the background while you're working on something, while you're writing, maybe while you're trying to go to sleep at night. You know, it's very calm and chill and atmospheric. Reminds me a lot of Nighttime Stories from Pelican earlier this year, but I think that record is a little bit more effective by having a more emotional heart to it. And who knows, maybe this does have that, and I'm just totally missing it because, again, I honestly haven't spent much time with this thing at all. And if that's the case, by all means, fucking grill me, dude. Fucking lay it on me. I got no problem admitting that. At the same time, if that is the case, then I would put some blame on the record for not doing enough to make me want to be more invested in this whole thing. Fans of instrumental post-metal will love this for sure. Maybe this is yet another record in this video that I have to chalk up to a personal bias, but once again, so be it. Next up, Cyber Warfare, the new EP from Horror, an industrial punk hip-hop fusion band that is making a lot of bold moves this summer. On top of this new EP release, they've also done a couple tours so far this year, a couple big ones. They were with Ghostmain for a little while at the beginning of the summer. They opened for Korn and Alice in Chains on their most recent tour, playing big stadiums. Point is, they're a very busy band, and I'm happy for them because it's very rare that you see a band as inherently strange and chaotic as they are going on so many big tours and having this much success this early on. I'm sure that you can guess by now that Horror, and for that matter Cyber Warfare by extension, not particularly accessible, not meant for casual listening, really. It's gritty, it's obtuse, it's unorthodox, the hip-hop flavors often directly contrast with the industrial and the hardcore punk flavors. Sometimes the band leans really heavy into the former, sometimes the band leans really heavy into the latter, and that can be disappointing if you're someone who really dislikes hip-hop, or for that matter, let's say you're someone who loves hip-hop and by sheer coincidence clicked on a fucking Albums I Missed video on Metal Meltdown. Guess what? I don't know if I can fully recommend this to you either, unless you're also really open-minded to a lot of like industrial and hardcore punk, which, let's be honest, is not always the case. Like, I don't really know many fans of Travis Scott that avidly listen to Ministry, or vice versa. But for those of you looking for something really challenging and dynamic from both those genres, dare I say, an in-between compromise of the two, then absolutely check this thing out, because it's really inventive, it's really wild. I think if Horror keeps up at this pace, their next full-length studio album is going to be an absolute fucking rager, and I cannot wait for it. Horror, definitely not for everyone, but definitely maybe give it a shot nonetheless. You never know. Next up is Action Rock by the Drippers, a band I found on Angry Metal Guy, and I'm very thankful I did because these guys gave me a strong, much-needed dose of nasty, dirty rock and fucking roll. The spirit, the raw rock and roll energy and heart here, unfuckable. It's just a really fun, strong, incredibly well-written rock album from start to finish. No filler, no bullshit. It's really well produced, but still retains the raw essence of true fucking chaotic rock and roll. Very much in line with a band like The Shrine, for instance. In fact, it makes me wonder why these two haven't done a fucking tour together. That would be crazy. It's like the best fucking plate of meat and potatoes hard rock you will have all year. With that in mind, if you're not a fan of this particular brand of hard rock, maybe this wouldn't do it for you, and I totally understand. It's not exactly the most expansive or progressive record, but it's also not trying to be. It just wants to be fun, nasty rock and roll, and that's what it is, and that's what it succeeds at. So, fuck it. Next up, Years of Aggression from Suicidal Angels, a band I've actually heard quite a bit about over the years, and yet, if we're being honest, I've never really listened to them. But hey, on the bright side, now's my opportunity. I sat down, listened to Years of Aggression, and it's pretty good. It's a pretty good collection of fucking nasty thrash. I dig it. It's alright. Feels like a really good mixture of old school thrash mentality with a little bit more new school thrash production value. And I really like that, you know? It's clean without compromising the grit. It's smart without compromising the raucous attitude or the juvenile spirit. It is inherently pretty generic in a lot of aspects. I mean, this band definitely wouldn't stand out in a playlist filled with, you know, big name thrash bands. But for what it is, it's solid. And seeing as how I feel like we're still in a bit of a thrash metal drought, it'll do. Next up, buried deep in a bottomless grave, yet another solid old school death metal record from 20 Buck Spin, the label that never fucking quits at this point. I did consider reviewing this, but there were a couple reasons I didn't. One being that I can't just give the spotlight to 20 Buck Spin all the time. I mean, I love you, but you ain't the only ones out there, you know? I gotta be free to spread my wings, alright? Plus, there was a certain big name record by a certain big name band that I felt needed a little bit more attention, so sorry. But I'm happy I at least get to talk about it a little bit here, because I think we've got yet another really solid record from 20 Buck Spin. I mean, Witch Vomit, not bringing much new to the table at this point. I mean, if you've been paying attention with anything coming out of 20 Buck Spin this summer, you arguably already know the drill, even if you don't know this band. That, in my opinion, does start to bring up an issue that I'm beginning to see with modern death metal, that a lot of bands aren't really pushing themselves anymore, and there's a wealth of bands that are all starting to bleed together and sound the same. Not Witch Vomit's fault, mind you, not anyone's fault, really. But I'm just noticing this now, that it's getting harder and harder for a lot of new death metal to stand out. And that's very much the problem that Witch Vomit does have on this record. Again, not their fault, but it is something I felt nonetheless. Because to put it simply, there's just nothing here that stands out. It's incredibly well put together. It's gross and grisly and nasty and violent in all the ways that we want old school death metal to be. In fact, aesthetically and sonically speaking, it captures that sound quite perfectly. But there are other bands that are doing it just as well, and in some aspects doing it way better. Take, for instance, the most recent record from Tomb Mold. Again, none of this is Witch Vomit's fault. It's the nature of the genre. It's the nature of what's been happening right now. Maybe it's proof that this resurgence in death metal is starting to hinder the genre a little bit. That's a discussion we'll have to have another time, though. For now, if you're still looking for that old school death metal sound, there's no harm in looking at this record, but just a fair warning that you can also get it virtually anywhere else at this point. So, you know. And finally, we have The Thief from Horseburner, an album that I really don't think anyone's been talking about. I haven't noticed any reviews of this. I haven't noticed a lot of people talking about this in any regard. And that's a shame, because I think it's really solid. There's a lot of really interesting ideas here, a lot of really cool compositions, a lot of really cool soundscapes and aesthetic decisions. It's heavy, it's dreary, it's moody, it's powerful. In retrospect, I wouldn't have even minded doing a full review of it. The only reason I really didn't is timing, to be fully honest. Ironically, that same issue, timing, is going to prevent me from going even further into detail, because we need to move this video along. I've been recording for a bit, and I have other shit to do today. Long story short, Horseburner is really cool. A smart record, a smart blend of doom, sludge, a little bit of prog, a lot of attitude, a lot of big riffs, a lot of fucking heavy nonsense. And I hope more people check it out, and hopefully next time Horseburner releases something, I'll have significantly more time to talk about it, because I think that they're really onto something with the sound that they've got going on here. And booyah! That's it! Those are all the albums that I feel that I missed within the month of August. I'm sure there are more, but I want to get this moving because, as I literally just said, there are things I need to do today. So I need to wrap this the fuck up. Let me know what records you feel that I missed. Let me know what you think I should be on the lookout for. Let me know what you're looking forward to within the next couple months as well, because the next couple months are cram-packed with new music. And as always, press that little magic button if you want updates on the Metal Meltdown immediately. And also, as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.